Captain James Reed stood at the helm of HMS Dauntless, watching the waves crash against his beloved ship. The salt air filled his lungs as he ran his hand along the worn wooden rail. This ship had been his home for 5 years now, through calm, seas and terrible storms alike. "Captain, they're here," said First Officer David Thompson, interrupting James's thoughts. James nodded and straightened his uniform. The foreign research team was arriving today. Naval Command had ordered him to welcome these observers aboard while the Dauntless underwent repairs in this quiet harbor. James wasn't happy about strangers poking around his ship, but orders were orders. "Very well. Let's greet our guests," he replied. 5 men in neat civilian clothes waited at the dock. Their leader, a tall man with glasses and a serious face, stepped forward. "Captain Reed, I am Thomas Wilson, Chief Observer. Thank you for allowing us to study your vessel." James forced a smile and shook the man's hand. "Welcome aboard the Dauntless, Mr. Wilson. I hope you find your stay educational." As they walked through the ship, James noticed how Thomas touched the walls almost reverently, studying every detail. The foreign team asked endless questions about the engines, the weapons, the communication systems. They took careful notes and whispered to each other in excitement. "Your technology is interesting," Thomas said carefully, clearly trying not to offend. Simple but very clever solutions. James felt a flash of pride mixed with annoyance. "We may not have the fanciest equipment, Mr. Wilson, but this ship has never failed us when it mattered." That evening, James invited Thomas to his quarters for tea. The rest of the research team was busy interviewing crew members about their duties. "I must admit, Captain," Thomas said, sipping his tea, "I didn't expect such a connection between your people and this vessel. It's fascinating." James looked around his small cabin. The wooden walls were decorated with photos of his crew celebrating birthdays, crossing the equator, working together during storms. 5 years of memories. The Dauntless isn't just metal and wood, Mr. Wilson. She's alive to us. Every creak and groan tells us something. Every person aboard knows their place perfectly. Thomas nodded slowly. "Your engineer Oliver showed us the engine room today. He talked about the machinery like they were his children." James laughed. "Oliver can hear a problem in the engine before any alarm sounds. He says each engine has its own voice." "And the young woman, Lucy, in communications?" "Shy as a mouse until you put her behind that radio," James said fondly. "Then she becomes unstoppable. She once maintained contact with a sinking vessel for 14 hours straight during a storm. Wouldn't take a break even when I ordered her to." Thomas looked thoughtful. "You speak of your crew like family." "That's exactly what we are," James replied, running his finger along the rim of his cup. "When you're at sea for months at a time, facing danger together, you become more than co-workers. We trust each other with our lives." Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the harbor in gold and red. In the distance, fishing boats were returning home for the night. It was peaceful. "Tomorrow we'll show you the weapons systems," James said, changing the subject. "Though I hope you never see them in action." Thomas looked up sharply. "You expect trouble, Captain?" James shook his head. "No, but a good captain is always prepared. These waters have been safe for years, but pirates still operate in some regions." "Pirates?" Thomas looked surprised. "Actual pirates? I thought they were just in history books and movies." "I wish they were," James said grimly. "Modern pirates are desperate men with fast boats and real guns. We've had a few close calls over the years." As if summoned by his words, David knocked urgently on the cabin door. "Captain, sorry to interrupt, but we've received reports of suspicious vessels in nearby waters. Probably nothing, but Harbor Patrol is on alert." James nodded. "Thank you. David, keep me informed." After the first officer left, Thomas looked worried. "Should we be concerned?" James smiled reassuringly. "It's likely just fishing boats where they shouldn't be. But that's life at sea, Mr. Wilson. Calm one minute, chaos the next. That's why this ship and her crew must always be ready." Neither man could know how prophetic those words would soon prove to be. The morning sun had barely risen when the first explosion shook the harbor, James was jolted awake by the violent rocking of his ship and the blaring of alarm bells. He rushed to the bridge, still pulling on his uniform jacket. "Report!" he barked as he entered. David was already there, face grim. "Pirates, sir. 3 vessels. They hit the harbor fuel depot first. They're heading our way now." James looked out the window. Black smoke billowed from the far end of the harbor. In the distance, he could see 3 fast boats racing toward them, heavy weapons visible on their decks. "All hands to battle stations," James ordered. "And get our guest to safety." "Sir," David hesitated. "Engineering reports our main guns are still offline for repairs. We have limited defensive capabilities." James clenched his jaw. The Dauntless was wounded, caught in the middle of maintenance. The worst possible timing. "Captain." Thomas burst onto the bridge, eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" "Pirates," James said flatly. "You and your team need to get to the safe room below decks." Another explosion rocked the harbor as the pirates fired on a nearby patrol boat, cutting it in half. The radio crackled to life. Lucy's voice was steady despite the chaos. "Captain, incoming transmission from the pirate vessels." "Put it through," James ordered. A rough male voice filled the bridge. "Attention HMS Dauntless, this is Captain Blackwood. Your ship is dead in the water and we have you surrounded. Surrender now or we'll destroy you and then level that pretty little town behind you." James looked toward the shore. The small, coastal town was just waking up. Thousands of innocent people lived there. Children would be getting ready for school. "What are our options?" he asked David quietly. "We can try to evacuate. Harbor patrol boats could get our people to shore. But the town remains unprotected," James finished. Thomas looked between them in disbelief. "Surely you're not considering fighting. Your ship is damaged. They outnumber you. It would be suicide." James turned to Lucy. "Open a channel to Blackwood." "Channel?" "Open, sir," she replied. "This is Captain James Reed of HMS Dauntless. There are innocent civilians in that town. If you want this ship, you'll have to come and take it." He nodded, and Lucy closed the channel. "Captain Reed," Thomas was nearly shouting. "Now, this is madness. Your ship isn't ready for battle." James faced him calmly. "Mr. Wilson, I suggest you and your team get below decks immediately. This is about to become very dangerous." Thomas stared at him, then at the rest of the bridge crew. None looked afraid. Determined, yes. Focused, but not afraid. "You're really going to fight?" he whispered. "We're not going to let them harm that town," James replied. "Now please, get to safety." Emma Wilson, the ship's doctor, appeared at the door. "I'll take them below, Captain." As Emma led the research team through the corridors, alarms blared and crew members rushed to their stations. Thomas was shocked at the transformation. The friendly sailors who had shown them around yesterday were now grim-faced warriors, moving with purpose and precision. "This is insanity," one of Thomas's assistants muttered. "Why don't they just evacuate? Why risk their lives?" Emma glanced back as she hurried them along. "There are 3,000 people in that town. Many of our crew have family there." They reached a reinforced door marked Emergency Shelter. "You'll be safe here," Emma said, pushing the door open. "I need to get to the medical bay. We'll likely have casualties soon." Thomas caught her arm. "Why do they follow him? Your captain into certain death?" Emma's eyes softened slightly. "Because he would do the same for any of us, for you even. That's what makes this more than just a ship." Before Thomas could respond, a massive explosion rocked the Dauntless. The lights flickered. "Direct hit on our port side," someone shouted from down the corridor. "I have to go," Emma said firmly. "Stay here, please." Through a small porthole in the shelter, Thomas watched as the pirates' boats circled the Dauntless, like sharks. Another explosion hit, closer this time. The ship groaned in protest. "They're going to die," he whispered. "They're all going to die protecting us in that town." On the bridge, James gripped the railing as his wounded ship shuddered under enemy fire. "Return fire with whatever we have," he ordered. "And prepare boarding defenses. I think they're coming aboard." David nodded grimly. "They're coming, sir, and we'll be ready." James looked toward the town where morning lights were coming on in windows. People unaware of the danger bearing down on them. People his ship was sworn to protect. "Yes," he said quietly. "We'll be ready." Thomas couldn't stay in the shelter. The sounds of battle echoed through the ship, explosions, shouting, the crack of gunfire. Despite warnings from the others, he slipped out and made his way through the trembling corridors of the Dauntless. What he saw changed everything. He thought he knew about humans in combat. Oliver, the jovial engineer who had spent hours showing Thomas the engines with jokes and laughter, now worked with deadly focus. His hands flew over damaged control panels, face streaked with grease and sweat. When a pipe burst, spraying scalding steam, Oliver simply wrapped his jacket around his hands and forced the valve shut, his skin blistering. "Why don't you evacuate?" Thomas shouted over the noise. Oliver didn't look up from his work. "If these engines fail, we're all dead. The town's dead. Not happening on my watch." Another explosion rocked the ship. Thomas stumbled against a wall as the lights flickered. "Pirates are boarding, all hands defend portside." The announcement blared through speakers. Thomas found himself running toward the sound of fighting. He wasn't sure why, curiosity or concern, perhaps both. He rounded a corner and froze. The narrow corridor had become a battlefield. Sailors fought desperately against armed pirates who had managed to board. In the chaos, Thomas spotted Lucy, the shy communications officer who had barely spoken during his tour. Now she was shouting orders, organizing the defense after her superior had fallen. "Hold the line, don't let them reach the bridge." A young sailor named William was hit. As he fell, Lucy dragged him behind cover, grabbed his weapon, and continued, fighting. There was no hesitation, no panic in her eyes, only fierce determination. Thomas pressed himself against a wall, trying to stay out of the way. This wasn't the choreographed violence of films. It was desperate, terrifying, and raw. Suddenly, a pirate broke through. The man spotted Thomas and raised his weapon with a snarl. Thomas closed his eyes, certain he was about to die. The shot never came. When Thomas opened his eyes, William stood before him, swaying on his feet despite his injury. The pirate lay unconscious at his feet. "Get back to the shelter," William gasped, blood seeping through his uniform. "Not safe here." "You're hurt," Thomas said, moving to support the young sailor as he collapsed against the wall. "Had worse." William managed a pained smile. "Why?" Thomas asked, helping William to a sitting position. "Why would you risk yourself for me? I'm nothing to you." William winced. "Captain says everyone on this ship deserves protection. Doesn't matter where you're from." Before Thomas could respond, the ship shuddered violently. The sound of tearing metal echoed through the corridor. "Direct hit to the command deck," someone shouted. "The captain—" William tried to stand but couldn't. Thomas made a decision. "Stay. Here. I'll get help." He moved through the ship, dodging battles and stepping over debris. The Dauntless was wounded badly, groaning like a living thing. When Thomas reached the bridge, the scene was one of controlled chaos. Part of the ceiling had collapsed. James stood at the command station, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. He was still giving orders, his voice calm despite everything. "Reroute power to the forward guns. We still have a chance to disable their main vessel." "Captain," David warned, "hull integrity is failing on decks 3 through 5. James nodded grimly. "Seal those sections. Everyone else to emergency stations." He turned and saw Thomas. For a moment, surprise flashed across his face. "Mr. Wilson, you should be in the shelter. Your men are dying to protect me. To protect strangers in that town," Thomas said. "I needed to understand why." A nearby console exploded in sparks. James pushed a young officer out of the way, taking the brunt of the blast against his back. He barely flinched. "Because it's our duty," James said simply, turning back to the battle map. "Because if we don't stand between evil and innocence, who will?" Thomas watched as the bridge crew worked together seamlessly, despite injuries and failing systems. They weren't fighting for glory or even for their country. They were fighting for each other and for people they had never met. "Sir," Lucy's voice came over the radio. Pirates are retreating from the boarding action. They've taken heavy losses. A cheer went up from the crew, quickly silenced by James raising his hand. Don't celebrate yet. Their main vessel is still out there, and we're barely holding together. Thomas moved to a damaged window. Through smoke and flame, he could see the largest pirate ship circling for another attack. The Dauntless shuddered beneath his feet, wounded but still fighting. In that moment, Thomas understood what he was truly witnessing. Not just a battle, but the purest expression of humanity's strength. The will to stand against darkness, whatever the cost. Thomas stood frozen as the largest pirate ship turned for another attack run. The Dauntless trembled beneath his feet like a wounded animal. Engine room reports main power failing, David called out. We're running on backup systems. James leaned heavily against the command console. His uniform was torn, and blood had soaked through his left sleeve. Status of our weapons? He asked, voice strained but steady. Port guns destroyed. Starboard guns at minimal capacity, someone replied. Thomas watched as James closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, determination had replaced exhaustion. Channel to Blackwood, he ordered. Lucy's hands flew over her damaged console. Channel. Open, sir. Blackwood, this is Captain Reed. Your boarding party has failed. Withdraw now, and we can end this without further bloodshed. Cruel laughter came through the speakers. Look at your ship, Reed. You're dead in the water. I'll give you one last chance to surrender before I blow what's left of you to pieces. James cut the transmission with a nod to Lucy. Prepare all remaining weapons. Focus everything on their engine section. Sir, David protested, we barely have enough power to keep the lights on. If we divert to weapons, I know, James said, quietly. Do it anyway. Thomas couldn't stay silent any longer. This is suicide. You've fought bravely, but your ship is falling apart. James turned to him, eyes clear despite everything. Mr. Wilson, I appreciate your concern, but this isn't over yet. Another explosion rocked the ship. This time part of the bridge wall collapsed. A large piece of metal struck James, sending him crashing to the floor. Captain. David knelt beside him as blood pooled beneath James's head. Thomas rushed forward, helping David move the heavy debris off James. The captain was unconscious, a deep gash across his temple. Get him to medical, David ordered two sailors who carefully lifted James. As they carried the captain away, Thomas noticed one of his own researchers, Peter, who had medical training, rushing to help. The sight stirred something in Thomas's chest. David took command, but uncertainty filled the bridge. Without James, the crew seemed lost. Thomas looked at the monitors showing the pirate vessel bearing down on them, then at the town visible through the windows. Morning had fully broken now. People would be heading to work, children to school, unaware of the danger. An idea struck him suddenly. Your ship's systems, they're similar to research vessels I've studied. David glanced at him. What of it? I know a way to reroute power. It won't fix everything, but it might give you enough for one good shot. David hesitated only briefly. Show me. Thomas moved to the engineering console. His fingers flew over. The unfamiliar controls, but the principles were the same as systems he'd studied for years. Mr. Thompson, Robert called from engineering over the radio. What's happening up there? Power is shifting all over the ship. We have help, David replied. Follow Mr. Wilson's lead. Within minutes, Thomas had created a bypass that rerouted emergency power from non-essential systems. This will give you approximately 2 minutes of full power, Thomas explained. After that, systems will likely fail completely. David nodded, grimly. 2 minutes is all we need. He turned to the weapons officer. Target their engine core. Everything we have, one shot. Down in the medical bay, Emma worked desperately to save the injured while Peter assisted. The researcher's hands were steady as he helped treat wounds he'd never seen before. Pressure here, Emma directed as they worked on James. Don't let up, Peter nodded, pressing hard on the bandage. I studied medicine before switching to research. Never thought I'd use it like this. Life's full of surprises, Emma said with a tired smile. Back on the bridge, everything was ready. The pirate ship loomed large in their view screen, preparing for a final attack. On my mark, David said. 3, 2, 1. Fire! The Dauntless shuddered as it unleashed everything it had left. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then a brilliant flash lit up the morning as the pirate ship's engine exploded. Secondary explosions followed, tearing through the vessel. Cheers erupted across the bridge but were quickly silenced as the Dauntless's lights flickered and died. Emergency lighting cast everything in an eerie red glow. "We did it," David said, quietly. "But at what cost?" Thomas looked around at the damaged ship, at the injured crew still at their posts despite everything. "Your captain was right," he said. "This isn't just a warship. It's something much more powerful." As if summoned by his words, a message came through from the medical bay. Emma's voice was tired but happy. "Bridge, this is medical. The captain is stable. He's asking about his ship." David smiled for the first time in hours. "Tell him his ship is still here. Wounded but standing. Just like her crew," Thomas thought. Just like her captain. The morning after the battle, Thomas stood on the deck of the Dauntless, watching the sunrise. The ship was barely floating, held together by emergency, repairs, and sheer determination. Repair crews from the harbor worked alongside the exhausted sailors, patching holes and strengthening damaged sections. Thomas felt different, changed. The notebook in his pocket, once filled with technical observations about the ship's capabilities, now seemed trivial compared to what he had learned. "Beautiful morning," a voice said behind him. Thomas turned to find James standing there. The captain looked terrible. His head bandaged, arm in a sling, face pale from blood loss, but he was standing. "Should you be out of bed?" Thomas asked. James smiled slightly. Emma said the same thing. But a captain needs to see his ship. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the calm water that had been a battlefield yesterday. 23 injured, James said quietly. 7 seriously, but no deaths. It's a miracle. "No, not a miracle," Thomas replied. "It was you, your crew, the way you fought for each other." James shook his head. "We had help. Your power routing idea saved us all. David told me what you did." Thomas felt his face warm with unexpected pride. "I just applied what I knew. Your crew did the real fighting." "Sometimes fighting isn't just about weapons," James said, looking out at the town that had been saved. Fishing boats were heading out for the day. Children walked to school. Normal life continued, untouched by the danger that had passed so close. "Came here to study your ship," Thomas admitted. "I thought it was primitive compared to the vessels I've researched. I was wrong." James raised an eyebrow, waiting for him to continue. "Technology can be copied," Thomas explained. "Weapons can be built. But what I saw yesterday on the way your people worked together, the way they protected each other and complete strangers, that can't be designed or manufactured." A group of sailors walked past carrying repair materials. Despite their injuries and exhaustion, they nodded respectfully to their captain. "I need to see him," Thomas said suddenly. "Who?" James asked. "William, the young sailor who saved my life." James led Thomas to the medical bay. It was crowded with injured crew members, but the atmosphere was surprisingly light. Someone was telling jokes in one corner, bringing smiles to bandaged faces. William lay on a bed near the window, his chest heavily bandaged. When he saw Thomas, his face lit up. "You made it," the young sailor said. "I was worried about you." Thomas sat beside the bed, emotion tightening his throat. "You nearly died protecting me. Why?" William looked confused by the question. "You were in danger. What else would I do?" Thomas glanced at James, who simply nodded as if to say, "Now you understand." Later that day, Thomas gathered his research team. They would be leaving soon, now that the harbor was secure and naval reinforcements had arrived. "We need to change our final report," Thomas told them. "But we have all the technical data we came for," Peter objected. "The technical data isn't what matters," Thomas replied. We came to study a warship, but what we found was something far more important. That evening, Thomas met with James in his temporary quarters. The captain's cabin had been destroyed in the battle. "I wanted to thank you," Thomas said, extending his hand, "for showing me what true strength looks like." James shook his hand firmly. "And I wanted to thank you for helping save my ship and crew." Thomas hesitated, then pulled out his official report. "I want you to see this before I submit it." James, I read the document slowly. At the bottom, Thomas had written, "We called it just a warship, we were wrong. It is neither the metal nor the weapons that make it formidable, it is the humans within. What makes HMS Dauntless truly powerful cannot be measured or copied. It is the courage, sacrifice, and unwavering humanity of her crew that represents the true strength we should seek to understand and honor." James handed the report back, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you." As Thomas prepared to board the car that would take his team to the airport, he took one last look at the Dauntless. Scaffolding now surrounded her damaged hull. Sailors moved purposefully across her deck. From a distance, she looked like any wounded ship, but Thomas knew better. He now understood that the true heart of a warship wasn't in its guns or armor, but in the people who gave it life. "Ready to go home?" Peter asked, standing beside him. Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes, but I'm not the same person who arrived here." As their car pulled away from the harbor, Thomas watched the Dauntless grow smaller in the distance. The lesson he had learned would stay with him forever. That in our darkest moments, it is not our weapons or technology that save us, but our humanity, our willingness to stand together against the darkness, whatever the cost.